That Naturopathic Podcast. TNP.
Hello there.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Michelle Pobega, naturopathic doctor.
And I'm Dr. David Miller, ND, and we hear your frustrations. This show is for you.
This show is for you if you're feeling like your current healthcare strategy is not getting to the root cause or the underlying reasons for your health.
This show is for you if you've been told that you're fine, but you definitely don't feel very well.
This show is for you if you're walking out of your doctor's office with 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 medications without any mention of diet, lifestyle, or a long-term game plan.
This show is for you if you've got several specialists taking care of you, but no one is really putting all the pieces together.
This show is for you if you believe that health should be part of healthcare. These problems have solutions.
We know it.
Our patients know it.
And we want you to know it.
Naturopathic medicine is the solution that you should know about.
Hey everyone, Dr. Dave here. As you probably know, this podcast is all about getting the word out there that naturopathic medicine has got some serious game. Educating and inspiring our listeners to work towards and achieve better health is what it's all about. But just like it takes energy and effort to invest in and strive towards greater health, it takes energy, effort, and financial support to do all the podcast things necessary to keep this message coming at you. So please afford me a moment to share our gratitude and give a real, heartfelt thank you to our show sponsor, Cytomatrix Canada. Their patient-focused vision of improving health outcomes with the use of high-quality, naturopathic doctor-designed supplements is 100% in alignment with what we're trying to do here at the podcast. Their enthusiasm for supporting what we're trying to do for you, the listener, encourages us to keep producing content that will inform and inspire. Thanks again to our sponsor, Cytomatrix Canada. Okay, welcome to another episode of That Naturopathic Podcast. It's Dr. Dave here, Dr. David Miller, ND. I got to say ND at the end.
We do.
We got to say the right things, Michelle.
Yes. And this is Dr. Michelle Pobega, also naturopathic doctor, as co-host on That Naturopathic Podcast.
Again, thank you.
Yeah. It's been a ride. I like it. It's a good journey. Yeah.
Rough day today. Rough day for Dr. Michelle today. Got some RuPaul drag race in.
Are you going to bring that in? Yeah. I had an emotional morning and it's my day off technically, other than really strategically maybe taking some meetings or recording the podcast. And this morning I did not feel in the headspace to do anything practical or work. So I watched the newest season of RuPaul's Drag Race on Netflix and it brought me a lot of joy. It always does. Give me some like sass and something sparkly. And I'm a happy girl. Like, it was good.
Does it influence your fashion sense? Because people who are listening can't see what you're wearing, but you're wearing a pretty rockin' Adidas top from the boys youth section.
It's true. I don't know if RuPaul's Drag Race influenced this per se. I would have to give credit to my boyfriend. He is a diehard Star Wars fan, and we were in Sport Check a couple of years back. This is a few years old now. And I saw this hanging in the boys youth section. And I was like, well, what does it say about my figure that I am a 14-year-old boy's size? But key tip, it was cheaper than the adult versions and less tax. So I kind of knocked it out of the park with this. And it's a dope jacket. Like the coloring on it is cool. Like I have Darth Vader, I have Chewie that hangs out around.
It looks pretty Star Wars-y or something like that. But anyway, that's pretty useless for you people listening. For the people listening only, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about today. We want to talk about what diet and when. And it's like, it's hard, right? Like even when I proposed this topic to you, Michelle, it was kind of like, diet. Because seriously, it's like, it's a necessary evil or whatever. Yeah. And it's clear as mud a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of belief systems that, if this diet worked for me, my God, it's the best diet in the world. Like I'm sure everyone's met a keto person or whatever, or a vegan, which is great. Do your thing, baby. That's like great. Good for you. But the problem is one size fits all. And then it's hard implementing this stuff, as a naturopathic doctor, like maybe sustainability. I talk about sometimes like the best diets from our perspective as a naturopath clinician is like the hardest ones to implement for the person. So anyway, I just want to hear what you have to say after that sort of preamble. What do you say about diets and what to use when?
I have like a bit of a love-hate relationship with that because it should be individualized. And I also realized that a lot of people don't have healthy relationships around food. So number one,
we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about that. That's a good one though.
I just hate the word diet to begin with.
Yeah.
So in my treatment plan, I literally have a subheading that's food and nutrition because I don't want to use the word diet specifically, right? So I subhead it that way when I make my recommendations for people. And I just find there's so much unlearning and relearning when it comes to what people should be eating. But it's a tough one because there's so much emotional eating, there's so much stress related eating, and a lot of people go into autopilot. So it's interesting waters to navigate, and people come in with the newest fad diets, and it's difficult to have the conversation sometimes with people if you can see that it's not benefiting for them, or they're really stuck on something. I have like this one client comes to mind. She's struggled with autoimmune conditions for a while, and it's her physicians can't quite land on exactly which one she's struggling with because it looks like possibly a few, and like some blood markers, as you know, aren't always specific for that. And she eats a very restricted diet because she has gas and bloating. We've worked on things before, but she refuses. She does not want to eat any animal protein. And I've been very respectful of that. But I also have some trepidations because I think that the lectins, the phytates, and the legumes, the grains, and the et cetera that she's dependent on are not serving her in the positive way. And it's become, I've made suggestions that I still think it's in her best interest, but I'm not going to force her, but it might be an uphill battle to get her where we need to be. And then there's some people who I know who have struggled with autoimmune conditions. And what really helped them was simplifying and even sometimes going on a temporary carnivore diet, or making sure to eat tip to tail and organ meats and eating vegetables primarily and getting rid of the grains just to make sure you're getting your essential amino acids and things. And so, I mean, I feel like the hard part is that, like you alluded to, there's so many different opinions about what's the best thing. And some people come into our office with preconceived ideas of what they want to do. And they may or may not always be open to the recommendations that we make, which we think or know, or at least want to try to see if it's in their best interest. And it's always a really interesting conversation with food.
Yeah, for sure. There was a period of time that I was prescribing basically elimination diet for everyone. And it's an amazing tool to have as a clinician, but you almost wish you could go to the person's house and cook for them. Just 'cause it's, you know what I mean? Like it's sustainability and the effort and commitment is huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, the results, I've seen just crazy results with that. And almost, I don't think I've had one person that didn't get some real benefit or insight into what they're doing.
Agreed. It's a hard sell though, to be like, hey,
I don't eat like that all the time.
Without testing, I want you to remove X, Y, and Z that create the most inflammation. And for a lot of people, they're kind of like, oh yeah, I don't know. And even when I run food sensitivity tests, and it's blatantly screaming in their face, the results are saying you have to lay off of dairy and eggs and this and this. And I have the conversation that it's not a lifelong sentence. It's a for where you are right now. And as we do the rest of the other healing work, we can get you at a place where 90% of this will probably be back into your diet and it'll be fine. Yeah. But even then, a lot of people want to fight me. So as much as I love the elimination diet, I find that sometimes it's a really hard sell to get people on board with.
Yeah. I don't blame them one bit.
Totally.
I think I've had some really sick people do it. When I say really sick, I hope you know what I mean. Like, just like, you know, cases that the person was ready to do whatever it took. If they're ready to do whatever it takes, elimination diet is hard to beat as part of your arsenal of tools. It's such
a phenomenal reset for people. I feel like that's the best way to look at it. It really does help create a massive reset for people's systems. Mm-hmm. I agree. But usually it is, you're right. Usually it's for people who feel like they're at their last resort coming to see us and they'll try anything. And then you're kind of like, well, guess what I've got for you? And they're like, whatever, I'll do it.
Yeah, no, like I this is back when before I referred out like every cancer case, like I refer every cancer case I get to like Jill Shanehouse or Chamandeep Singh, Chamandeep Ali Singh, or whoever, someone who's used to dealing with that stuff. Because I don't feel good enough in that field to do it. But when I was not referring out, I remember putting a woman who, I think she had a diagnosis of cancer, and then she was like, I want to do everything I can to be as healthy as I can. We put her on that elimination diet. She did it to a T because her why is pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she wrote, I remember the email she wrote me, I'm like a fire breathing dragon. I'm like, I'm back. And I'm so healthy.
Oh, I love
and I
it.
feel, and it was like, wow, like this woman like spitting straight fire through.
But you said something interesting too, is as naturopaths, you and I understand the benefits of this, but we don't live that all day, every day. I have lived that when I was going through my own health crisis and I had to rebuild myself. Yeah. But the ultimate goal I find, as for myself, at least, and I want to see where you land on this, is, and I imagine it's the same, is to always get people on the most diverse diet they could possibly have, with that agrees, that elevates their health rather than works against it. And sometimes that means you have to make certain sacrifices at the beginning and compromises at the beginning to reestablish a healthier balance in the body, so the body's more capable of having a larger variety of foods. And that goes for a lot of GI issues that you and I deal with. Sometimes you have to make some sacrifices at the onset. But I never want someone to just indefinitely be like, okay, you're gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's annoying.
Yeah, well, what you're getting at is, I mean, at least a part of what you're getting at is sustainability.
Exactly.
And that's a big thing for me. Like, if I can't, unless there's like, it's sort of like there's a time limit. Like, that's what's cool about if you do elimination diet. Like, I've found personally, again, this could be different for other people. I find 2 to 3 weeks of doing it perfectly gives you enough of a starting point to then reintroduce, because the reintroduction is the real, that's the real deal. That's when you find out whether it's necessary to avoid that that food or not. So if there's endpoints, then that's okay.
Yeah,
you can do that. You can sort of do anything with it. Humans can almost do anything if they know when the end is in sight.
Yeah. But what I've loved about those processes is sometimes I get people to come back and they're like, I feel so much better not eating gluten that I'm okay not having it back in my diet. And I'm like, cool, now you made that choice for yourself. And that's always
very different, isn't it?
That's always the ultimate goal, is like, okay, you're now going to choose to not bring that back in, because the moment you had it, you felt horrible and you're like, that's not worth it to me. And for me also, because of me and yours and mine, our invested interest, in the microbiome. Thank you. Our collective interest in the microbiome and feeding it means that we want to have a good diverse amount of fibers. So I always want people to be on the most diverse diet possible with a really high variety of those types of things. I think one of the worst things we can get into is just same thing all day, every day. That boring redundancy. And sometimes when we go on these elimination diets and things, it's hard for people to get creative. So that's never something that I want people to be on long term. And if it takes out certain kinds of things that do add nutritional value and gains long term, then I would like to somehow find a way to bring that back in.
Awesome. Okay. So spend a lot of time on elimination diet, probably rightfully so, because I think it is a pretty badass diet to do if you can do it, and if you've got serious or autoimmune or your why is deep and you want some massive change pretty quick. I do like it, and but we should move on. Let me just touch on the other ones that we're good. I'll just for the listeners, we'll talk really briefly about. We'll touch on each one of these really briefly. So vegan, vegetarian, low FODMAP, Candida diet, anti-inflammatory diet. Spoiler alert, I don't really know what those are. Time restricted eating, paleo and autoimmune paleo, keto, SCD or GAPS diet, calorie restriction, and just a whole foods diet or a stop eating absolute shit diet, and a lectin free diet, which I added because you talked about lectins. So those are just some, and that's not an exhaustive list, but that covers a lot of stuff you hear coming in the office, I'm sure.
Totally.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to like something like vegan or vegetarian, you brought up the fact that it's good for kidney issues. But do you know what's really interesting? I don't treat a lot of kidney disease because that's a really specific niche.
Yeah.
But I do have one client who has polycystic kidney disease.
Yeah.
And he's actually on more of like a paleo keto diet. And he's been holding steady. And he's in a group of people who are all PCOS, I'm sorry, polycystic kidney disease sufferers and PKD sufferers. And a lot of them have been finding that somehow the keto diet's been helping them, which is the complete opposite of a vegan and vegetarian diet. So it's interesting how that's been coming up. Now, long-term, is that going to be sustainable? I don't know. But
that's interesting though.
Yeah,
but,
I know.
You know, because what could be going on there when you got, like, I don't know enough about those different disorders that all fit that chronic kidney disease, whatever. Some of them may be autoimmune propagated more so than protein is the problem.
Right.
That could be what's going on in cases like that, because as you know, and we'll talk about it a little bit, like different kinds of starches and things like that might contribute to different sort of dysfunctions in the gut, which then cause some autoimmune weirdness. Right. And you know, autoimmune is weird. And
it is weird.
Maybe the autoimmune weirdness is worse than the too much protein for the kidney to have to work with. So,
and I think it would still be within a range of, I think they're still modifying the amount of animal protein they have. It's just eating more of the greens that are allowed in, say, like a keto diet with the healthy fats and stuff to sustain them. And I just found it was really interesting when he came. I had a bit of a break from seeing this client, and then he came back to me. He was like, "So now I'm in this group, and I'm trying keto." And I was like, "Wowza!" And there's also a naturopath that we know, Andra.
Campitelli.
Is it Campitelli? She is keto, and she also she had polycystic kidney disease, so she's treated it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have to talk to her sometime.
I know. I'd love to pick her brain more, but I mean,
because it's a bit counterintuitive. Because when you like, I have a patient who's got chronic kidney disease. I think she might be stage 3, and low protein diet will be part of what you do normally for someone who's got stage 3 kidney disease.
Well, that's been like the gold standard for years, is low protein diet for kids.
And it makes sense to some degree again, but again, if you have this autoimmune stuff going on, maybe that's precludes it in terms of its importance. But the other things we wanted to say with vegan, vegetarian is deficiencies are probably abound, and including protein and B12.
And I have to also ask, this question comes up into my mind. If someone chose to go vegan or vegetarian, I always ask why. Is it ethical? Is it religious? Is it whatever? And some people are like, well, I just found that I didn't tolerate meat well. And I'm like, do you have a stomach acid issue?
Yeah.
Right? Or do you have a bile deficiency issue? Because that's going to make it more difficult to digest your proteins and your fats, which is also going to further perpetuate iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, B vitamin deficiencies, all that kind of stuff. So, right.
Yeah. So, I say if someone's vegan or vegetarian and that's by ethical, sort of spiritual, then you go, girl. Guy,
I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to say, okay, I just need to know so I know what my boundaries are, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
One other thing I wondered about was carnitine. And remember, carnitine's probably, I'm sure carnitine is named carnitine because of carna being meat. So a meat-derived protein that's good for the heart and mitochondrial function. So I sometimes wonder about carnitine in vegetarian, vegan too.
Well, you brought up something about lectins. So that's the thing with vegetarian and vegan stuff, is that a lot of nuts, seeds, legumes, grains, certain vegetables and things like that, they're naturally sources of these things called anti-nutrients, phytates, and lectins, which have now been found to be highly inflammatory in a lot of bodies, as well as
I think that's a key qualifier in some people.
And they can also like literally interfere with digestion. I think it was Joe Clausen, who works for Rocky Mountain Analytical. I was talking to him about this, and the red component he told me this, the part that makes red kidney beans red is technically a protease inhibitor. So it stops protein enzymes from breaking down protein. I was like, well, it just screws its own digestion. Right. And I was like, that's wild. So I think we're only starting to begin to understand how these things affect the human body. And historically or ancestrally, those types of nuts, seeds, and grains would be soaked or fermented or something before they were eaten. And it breaks down a lot of these nutrients. So if you are consuming a vegan or vegetarian diet, you need to understand maybe how to manage those particular components so that they create less irritation to your system after.
Don't eat raw kidney beans, people.
Yeah. Like pressure cook them or something just to begin to denature some of the proteins, like that those things are helpful for digestion.
I don't use lectin-free diet in clinical practice.
I don't either.
If people do it, and I mean, I'll do my same. I got my Bruce County saying it's good if it's good. If that does you good, you go right on. But I don't find it clinically. I don't find it helpful enough to sort of hang a hat on.
No, usually I just give them like a holistic nutrition website to be like, here's how to soak your nuts and seeds and legumes. And I'll be like, start implementing this a little bit more at the very least, if you're going to continue to eat like larger volumes of those things.
Exactly. Okay. Well, let's move on to low FODMAP. What's your first sort of thoughts? We've talked about it before.
Yeah. Not a fan.
Yeah.
I understand its clinical relevance for specific conditions.
Yeah.
And for a finite period of time, like the elimination diet. I
Being
don't
precise
think,
with your language now, Michelle.
Absolutely. I feel like I've had people come into my office with the quote unquote IBS diagnosis and told to go on a low FODMAPs diet. And they come back into my office with very little guidelines and no real time point as to when to finish that. And the minute they stray from that diet, they feel like everything blows up symptom wise again, and they feel helpless and extremely like fatigued of the diet and restricted by it. And it's because the underlying root issues were not addressed.
Bam. I like it. I kind of feel the same. It's not a long-term approach. I find it diagnostically helpful to so if you do FODMAP properly, it tells us, okay, there's some issue with the digestion of these fructooligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. There's some issue with FODMAPs in the gut, and that tells us there's probably a microbial component, which is helpful clinically. Absolutely. However, you're starving your good bacteria too. Voila. Right. So anyway, we gotta know. I think you were precise with your language. I think that's key with that one, is the time period.
And it can't be something that you do in isolation. You have to treat the root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So candida and anti-inflammatory diet. I'm just going to wrap them together. I'm going to be honest about what I don't even know what they are.
I would group the anti-inflammatory diet with an elimination diet, because when you do an elimination diet,
here's the thing, Michelle, you go and tell me what they are, because I don't even know. Like, when we say elimination diet, like I'm following some metagenics document from years ago. Right. Okay. And then someone else's idea of the elimination diet won't have oranges on it. Yeah. We still call them both collectively the elimination diet. And this is where I was getting, that issue becomes even more sort of like magnified with a candida diet, because someone wrote a candida diet book. Who knows what they know? And then and then they'll be grouped together with another candida, and they're not the same.
Well, here's the thing is, like, we're learning, when these things began, like the elimination diet, we learned about that while we were in school. This is like well over a decade ago. There's been so much development in nutrition and dietary kind of shifts and changes and research over the last decade. Like, I don't know how many fad diets have come out in the last 10 years. It's actually been pretty wild. So there's new things. And even the idea of phytates and lectins have come out, where when we learned the elimination diet, legumes and nuts and seeds are all great outside of peanuts, basically, right? Where now I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know if I 100% agree. If you're going to eat them, you got to do this, this, and this. So I feel like everything is evolving. So I understand why there's confusion with this, but I tend to see the anti-inflammatory diet similar to the elimination diet, in that the most prominently inflammatory foods for majority of the population are removed, and then you can I would, even if it's an anti-inflammatory, I would still do the process of like reintroduction at some point to narrow down that food list so it's not exhaustive for the person if they have to be on it for a slightly longer period of time. But again, never done in isolation. I'm still trying to optimize digestive function and rebalance all the other moving parts of what makes that person them. Candida diet I find is helpful though, because if someone is struggling with candida, yeast is a natural part of who we are as humans, but it's opportunistic. Just like a lot of the pathogens in SIBO can be opportunistic too. If there's an environment that allows them to thrive, they're going to take that environment. So if there's a whole bunch of weaknesses and issues that have happened in the gut, the yeast might just be like blowing up in numbers well above and beyond where it should. And then it causes problems. And that's also why it's difficult to manage, because it's part of who we are. So the immune system isn't always on top of like regulating it as much. So I think it is important to go on an anti-candida diet to some degree for people so that we can manage it. I call it feeding the beast. You need to stop feeding the beast while you're bringing those numbers down as well, because it's kind of like all hands on deck for an anti-candida diet. Because sometimes it's a real bugger to get rid of. And that's like minimal carbs or choosing your carbs wisely and making sure they're always in a balanced meal. Your carbs are your least dominant thing on your plate when it comes to complex carbohydrates. They're never refined carbs. Refined sugars are out. Most sugars are out. And I even restrict or I don't hate the word restrict. I minimize fruit intake. And I have come to learn certain fruits tend to acquire more molds and mycotoxins, which will then further irritate a candida person, like a lot of citrus fruit, melons, strawberries, things like that. And I typically take out the softer nuts, which tend to have more molds and mycotoxins, like peanuts, cashews, like pistachios, that kind of stuff. That tends to be the basis of it. But otherwise, it's a balanced diet with anything that would be like low or avoidance of fungal related foods or high sugary foods, basically.
Yeah. So I just looked up the candida diet, whoever wrote this.
But I don't know if I follow a specific one that somebody else created.
That's kind of what I was getting at, is like your idea. I would recommend anyone who's doing like a candida diet or an anti-inflammatory diet, see a naturopath, not, make sure that person's held to a really high standard with clinical nutrition and has a background in understanding these things. Here's the 9 is they've got like 9 bullet points here for candida diet. Avoid added sugars every diet. Cut out junk food every diet. Eat non-starchy vegetables. You think of FODMAPs or SCD diet. Eat low sugar fruits. Okay. Some diets. Enjoy healthy proteins. Probably every diet other than, it doesn't even say meat protein. So every diet. Use healthy fats and oils. Okay. Minimize your caffeine. Probably a good idea for a lot of people. And eat non-glutinous grains, gluten-free diet. You see, there's just so much. Enjoy fermented foods. There's so much overlap, I guess.
And the thing is, it says enjoy fermented foods, where I find that's hit or miss depending on the person who's struggling. And I'll take them off of yeasty foods. So I will be like, I'm sorry, you can't have wine, beer, and ciders. But if you want a shot of tequila from time to time, knock yourself out of the park, right?
Yeah.
Right. But because so things like that, I have to be careful with. Some people might be more reactive to chocolates and coffee because of the mycotoxins on those. This is where it has to become a little bit more individualized. But
we're always going to go back to that, right? Individualized.
Yeah. I mean, like it's the core of the foundations of our work, but
and it's kind of the spoiler for this whole episode. It's always
spoiler,
always individualized. And we got these different tools, but we're always going to individualize. Okay. Time restricted eating. I'll talk about this one first. You can add in whatever you want after, but I'll say this is the one I'm using a lot in clinic because it's easy. It's an easy first step. And because you're not really restricting people of the food or amount of food, although it's never great to overeat crappy food. But I think it's kind of like telling someone like, don't smoke. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to pay you whatever per hour to tell me not to smoke. Well, I feel the same way about like, don't eat a whole bunch of really shitty food or like really sugary foods. Like, thank you very much. But at least with this, I just say, look, finish your dinner. So hopefully you have breakfast at whatever time in the morning, and you can add, you were going to say something about early morning stomach.
We can get into that
appetite. Sure. But assuming, big assumption, you eat like a normal time breakfast, maybe between 7 and 10 a.m. I don't know. and then you just eat your normal lunch, and then you eat your normal dinner. And then just if you have this is really only applicable to people who have like that nighttime snack or like a after dinner snack, like 8 p.m. or whatever. Stop eating that and just eat it earlier.
Yeah.
So it's not about different food. It's not about less food. It's about when you eat those same foods. And if you do that, you're really going to have a massive impact on your circadian rhythms, which affect everything. There's two things that affect circadian rhythms. That's the sun and when you eat. And so you can't really do much about the sun, even though we try to do something with daylight savings time. And don't get me started on that. I mean, the sun comes up when it comes up. Why do we have to, be humans about that and try to change everything? But anyway, when you eat is the other input or changeable factor on the circadian clock, all your body rhythms. So if you eat too late, you don't go into somnolence. You don't get into that pre-sleep zone. Means your sleep is not going to be as good. You're not going to regenerate as well overnight. Your gut now has been told, okay, still working, keep working, guys. And so it's not allowed to like clean up or do, say, immune cancer surveillance, just for an example. You can't digest foods and also do your autophagy or autophagy or whatever and cancer clearance at the same time. They don't happen at the same time. So that's one of my favorite ones to do. First step with people, the time restricted eating or time restricted feeding. A lot of good evidence on that. And I guess some people go extreme and do like intermittent fasting or whatever, but
Yeah,
really don't eat your nighttime snack and that's a good step in the right direction.
yeah, I agree. I think that if people can eliminate that after dinner snack, there's recently I've had an uptick of people being like, I always crave something sweet after dinner. I have to have something sweet, and I'm getting a lot of that. I find that a big driving factor in that too is poor blood sugar regulation in the first place. People's meals are poorly balanced. And if you're going to break your fast, I don't care if it's lunch is your first meal or you actually have a breakfast, you're breaking your fast, which is breakfast, break fast. It should have protein. None of this, I'm having a bowl of cereal. None of this, I had a big bagel. None of this croissant stuff. Like, we have been so disillusioned to think that that's a sustainable breakfast. It's not in this day and age. Maybe back in the day, like I know in Italy, they all have like a pastry and like a cappuccino, and then they're off for their day. But then they have like a really substantial like lunch. But I think some traditional habits that we have don't translate to modern society because of the newer types of stresses and challenges that we go through biologically, emotionally, mentally, physically, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to adapt, and not having protein first thing in the day at your first meal, at least, is going to create a roller coaster for your blood sugar, which means your energy and your mood is going to follow. And if your energy and mood crash, you're going to make poor choices about your food after that. You're probably going to want to snack more. You're probably going to grab quick fixes. You're probably going to grab those sugars, and you're just going to be on this roller coaster again. And I find that's a really big part, that when people start to balance out their meals, they're able to snack less. They get less cravings. They don't have the nighttime cravings as much either. So it's interesting because it's really, again, it's meeting the person where they're at. For some people, they can be like, okay, I'm just going to start by not snacking after dinner, and they're good to go for that. Other people, it's hella hard, and I have to start with balancing their meals first.
Mm-hmm.
I find there's also been a lot of people coming in who inadvertently are intermittent fasting because they don't have an appetite in the morning. And they're like, I don't feel hungry till at least 11:30 or 12 o'clock. So I don't push them. I don't want to make people feel nauseated. But to me, that's always been a sign of their cortisol awakening response is probably like pooped out, and they don't have that wake up, get up response and wake up all the organs that we should have in the morning, which includes our digestive function. So they don't have that appetite because they're probably just like pooped out. And that goes back to your circadian rhythm and 24-hour clock scenario. So I'm going to have to try that no snacking at night. And I'm going to have to go back to see some of my clients that have complained about not having an appetite in the morning to see if they tend to be snackers in the evening. Because if that's the case, I'm going to see if removing that nighttime snack makes a shift for them too.
Yeah.
Interesting to think, because I've never thought about that before. So thanks for bringing that to my attention.
In some cases it might. And then I'll just say people in the morning, if you don't have an appetite in the morning, it's a stomach dysfunction of some form, maybe biochemical, maybe the effect of cortisol on the stomach, some other, that's another aspect I haven't really looked at. We always focus on what we focus on, but for me, it's broadly speaking, it's a sign of stomach dysfunction. And if I get patient's stomach feeling better, usually that appetite improves in the morning. So
Yeah.
that's my strategy. Okay.
Cool.
Paleo and autoimmune paleo. I mean,
AIP.
AIP diet. You down with AIP?
Yeah, you know me. I don't really prescribe it per se, but I think that
you'd support it probably a lot of time, right?
I would support it. And I think that in my way of individualizing dietary plans for people, I have inadvertently supported it. Because for me, I think that paleo is probably the most balanced diet that majority of the population would probably feel well on. It's low in excessive grain consumption or no grains, but maybe for some people, some grains are fine, but it's really the ones that are least problematic. It's low in toxic foods and chemical heavy foods. It's low in sugars. And I feel like most people in this world can benefit from that, because what's screwing up most of North American health right now is crappy diet that's high in sugars, excessively high in carbohydrates, excessively high in preservatives and chemicals and glyphosate and all that stuff. And if you remove those three things, most people are going to feel pretty good. And I feel like it really goes down to basics of eating mostly a whole foods diet, a paleo diet. And I'm down with that. Right. Yeah. And I feel like to kind of put it
hard to argue with it.
Right.
Yeah. I completely agree with you in terms of the plausibility of the paleo diet being like a pretty good standard diet for the most part. Again, there's always going to be conditions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know. But as one that is like fairly easily mentally digested as to what is it? Okay. What would like more older cultures have eaten, like pre-agrarian? Yeah. Okay. I can sort of get into that. And you can see the benefit of that. And I'm probably more like you. I'm supporting it clinically when people do it. I'm like, go for it.
Yeah.
What was it? Was that the 30 day? What's that? 30?
Whole 30, the whole 30 diet. I think you know what?
I think it was paleo, people have done it.
I think it's paleo, but I think it's still like paleo / elimination diet. So there's still a little bit of a restrictiveness, but maybe it also only feels restricted for people in North America because we're so used to eating junk.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's about perspective. A lot of people would probably look at the way I eat, which I feel highly satisfied with the way I eat. I don't feel like there's restrictions. I don't feel like there's limitations or I don't feel like there's a deficit in my nutritional value, but people based on standard North American eating habits would probably be like, oh my God, that's so restrictive. Meanwhile, I'm just like, I'm loving my life here, guys. Like I'm good. Yeah. So I think it's all about perspective too.
Yeah. I think I'm just looking at the whole 30. Yeah. It looks like what you're saying is a kind of restricted paleo.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're probably going to get results with it. But again, sustainability, and that's why it's whole 30, not whole rest of your life. It's hard. Yeah. How about we move on to keto?
Yeah. So what would you say like the benefits of keto are, Dave?
Well, I mean, I'll go old school and say it's an old anti-epilepsy. Originally, I think that was, and that's really cool. And I think if this would be where you need like either conventional or naturopathic medical management. If you're someone with epilepsy, it's something worth looking into.
Yeah.
So that's the original sort of thinking with it. And so neurological conditions also seem to be indicated to whatever you call a neurological condition. I mean, the whole body's involved in neurological conditions, but you can see some applications for it with those. I don't prescribe it per se. I would support anyone through it.
Yeah.
The things I'm going to be aware of as a gut guy are high fat and the the possibility that high fat, because keto really just means low carb. It gets misconstrued as being a high fat diet. I'm like, well, not really. It just means low carb. And often that just gets the rebound on that is, okay, well then I'll eat more fat. So you just got to be careful with fats in the digestive tract. They can be inflammatory and problematic in terms of their breakdown toxicity.
Yeah.
And then maybe
especially if your liver gallbladder is compromised.
Exactly.
Ew.
Well, then there you go. Your individuality comes in right there.
Yeah.
And then maybe too much protein sometimes for some people, if they have an issue with protein, if they're, like those stage 3 kidney disease or other sort of sensitivities to protein.
I have some trepidations about the keto diet because it says because it's technically low carbs. It's not just no sugar, no grains. It's also no fruits, most fruits, except for maybe berries because they're low glycemic index. And even a significant amount of vegetables are basically kicked out because of their sugar content or carb content in the vegetables. So most colored vegetables or colorful vegetables are out. It's almost limited to a specific group of green veggies. And again, going back to fiber, which is the same reason why I don't love the low FODMAPs diet, is because our microbiome loves a variety of different fibers to feed off of. If we want our microbiome to thrive, we need to give it the fertilizer and the fuel to thrive. And I'm curious to see the long-term ramifications of like a carnivore diet, a keto diet, things like that on microbiome. Now, initial thing is people are like, no, it's fine. My microbiome is amazing and this and that. But I don't know. I'm curious. I feel like a lot of our testing may not even be as adequate as it needs to be to assess the microbiome, because gut health is only in the last 5-10 years really starting to have a light shone on it. So
a conventional light for sure.
Yeah. Like from a science and research perspective, like I'm only now seeing so much more invested interest in that. So whether or not we're actually equipped to properly investigate those things and research them. And also these are still newer types of dietary habits. So I'm curious to see what long-term comes out from that. But that's the thing for me.
Yeah, just for like historical or as much factual completion here, the classic ketogenic diet is rich in lipids, 90%, and low in carbohydrates and protein in order to produce ketosis and simulates a starvation state. So the whole idea with it was to get you into a state that simulated starvation or fasting, which we know has massive benefits. And that's a couple thousand years old, that Hippocratic sort of stuff, that we know that fasting has a use. Got to be careful, I'm sure, in some people.
Totally.
But let's move on, just to be complete. Let's move on to specific carbohydrate diet, or the GAPS diet, which I've lumped together because they probably have more in common than different. And I'm sure someone will disagree, and that's okay. We're allowed to disagree. But clinically, I find them sort of used the same way. SCD, we'll say SCD diet, Crohn's, colitis, IBD. That's the Breaking the Vicious Cycle book.
Yeah.
And it's legit. Like, it's probably helpful in a lot of people's cases. And so it's legit clinically, or it's legit if you're being, guided by your medical doctor, or you're just sharp and doing it on your own. And I think both of them have to do with this sort of gut-brain connection.
And gut integrity, like leaky gut and just general inflammation. So, because if you have something that's simple,
big concept, which somehow we didn't talk about. So go.
No, I mean, it's funny enough. I just listened to a talk yesterday about Crohn's and colitis. And I was telling you, I listened to it yesterday, a webinar about this, and they were talking about bringing in simple to digest things. So maybe you have to do an elemental shake. Maybe you need to do simple monosaccharides and disaccharide types of sugars that don't require an excessive amount of breakdown. Because I think what people don't understand is that it does require a lot of energy to digest food. And if what we need to do is redirect the energy to heal your gut lining, then we don't want to exhaust energy digesting food We want to preserve the
Exactly.
energy for healing capacity and repair capacity. So doing these kinds of diets when there's excessive gut damage, like celiac, Crohn's, colitis, they can be super helpful. And like they were talking about even like congee as a really amazing way, like basically like rice porridge to improve calories, because a lot of people with Crohn's and colitis or celiac disease, they have severe malnutrition and lose a lot of weight. So in order to increase caloric content, but not overly exhaust digestive function and energy to do that, you're going to use like congee and bananas and, you know, things like that to get people at least back into a place. And then you begin to build, and then you start to reintroduce more like raw veggies and fibers once they're in a more like, I guess, in a remission type of state where there aren't in a chronic excessive flare and the damage has been put out for the most part. I think it could be very helpful. And it's so funny. I don't treat a lot of Crohn's and colitis. I get a lot of IBS and a lot of reflux in my clinic. So whenever I get a Crohn's and colitis person, I almost have to like reshift my thought pattern, because I'm so used to having people balance with macros and getting good protein and good fats. Where with these people, you have to be like, no, you can't have a million types of fibers. You can't have, you really have to scale it back. And it's a different headspace.
Yeah, they're different. I would agree. The biggest utility probably for SCD, at least as far as we can tell, is more for the IBD rather than the IBS sort of thing. And I think you and I find other root causes or closer to root causes for IBS that might require less heroic dietary interventions.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Another thing you can do is caloric restriction. So just decreasing calories. I mean, that's old school, sort of conventional Weight Watchers, that sort of thinking.
Hate it. I hate it.
Don't like it, eh?
I hate it. I'm not the type of person, I'm just going to put this out there. So if you want to come work with me and you want me to tell you how many calories of protein and how many that's not my jam. Like I don't like how people get very focused on the numbers rather than the quality of their food. I'd rather focus on the quality and do like pie chart estimates on what your plate looks like. That's my jam, because I feel like sometimes people get hyper focused on those numbers to the point of getting obsessive and stressed about it. And I don't want to fuel that fire.
Yeah. Gotta be careful with it for sure. I'll step back a bit and say, I respect caloric restriction as a kind of concept, especially if you're eating like a pizza for dinner and like that's enough calories in a day. Like if you're doing that and you're surprised. Pizza for me is a bogey food. It's one of these foods that I can just eat and it's like bottomless pit. It's the weirdest. It's the combination of like carbs and tomato umami taste, and then a little bit of fat and salt. And then it's like, I'm done.
Oh, it's so good.
So you got to be careful. I poo-pooed calorie restriction. Like I had to post a long time ago, you're not a calorimeter, because you're not. It's a lot more beautiful than that, you know, but calories do matter.
They do.
But do you focus on them completely and count? And I mean, I think you run the risk of doing what you're talking about there and just kind of going like orthocaloricrexia or
and
whatever.
We had a problem with that with people who read food labels. They look at the nutritional value and they look at calories and fats and protein, but they don't look at the ingredients. And I'm like, we have to, I find like my discussions with clients is more a re-education that food is more than calories. It's information for your body. We need to make sure we're providing your body with the right information, because a lot of calories are empty calories, so that provides zero benefit to your system. And now you're just going to put on like weight for the sake of calories, but you didn't get any actual benefit beyond that. So that's also where and obviously if someone's eating pizza for breakfast, there's a whole discussion about that too, but I tend to not focus on the calorie side.
It's a hyper-focused is the problem, I think, that we're sort of agreeing on, is if that's to the extent that you don't look at any other aspect of food. Big problem. Is it still relevant? Yes. And then I just want to say, like, we just eat whole foods as a type of diet.
That's it.
A type of nutrition strategy. Like, don't get food that is processed and really, really crappy.
Yeah.
Make your own food. It's hard sometimes to to do that if you're like busy and have you work too long, you don't
Time,
sleep
money,
enough.
energy, right? Those resources.
Yeah, exactly. Or you got like, 5 kids and they're all running around doing crazy crap all the time. And so it's hard, but I think we need to, as best as we can, teach the kids that we live with that food's really important, food preparation.
Yeah.
I would say, I don't know about you, but I would say like from like concept to completion and dishes and everything of a meal, it takes a while. Sometimes it'd be like an hour and a bit.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a worthwhile thing. But if you can eat whole foods, it's a great first step. Just don't change anything else. Just eat whole foods. Even if you eat a little too much, you'll be better off than, too many pizzas and Chinese food and stuff like that.
Sometimes with my clients, it's just a matter of like, just fill your cart up with more veggies. And if you still need to eat a frozen pizza, have a side of veggies on the side. At least start creating a little bit of balance there, just to create a little bit of a shift, or learning how to batch cook and stuff so you can make a larger
huge.
volume.
Batch cook is huge.
I love my slow cooker in the winter is like my jam. You make a big thing of like stew or like chili or whatever, and then you're good for a few days. But it does take a little bit of thought. It does take a little bit of foresight. It does take a little bit more preparation, and you have to find your rhythm around it. There's days I don't want to cook. So sometimes I'm just like, I'm literally just going to whip out some hummus and have some veggies and I'm going to call it a day. Like, I'm not going to lie. There are days where I'm super lazy like that.
For sure. Same.
But yeah.
Freezer meals can be helpful too. If you do that batch cook, put 1 or 2 in the freezer, and then you got some backups.
Yeah.
For when those days come, because they do come to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's the end of the road, isn't it? Did we cover our ground? I think so.
I think we did. I mean, I think it was fairly comprehensive. I hope.
I think so too.
And I learned a bit from you again. So that's good. Sir. And this is good because we have to go through things before and sort of like make sure it's sort of clinically relevant and relevant to the listener. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little lesson on what diet and when, and maybe a better way of saying it is this clinical nutrition to you, Michelle? Because I agree, diet has got some connotations or whatever. What do we call?
I don't know. I would use the word nutrition somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I feel like diet
Eating,
goes back
nutrition.
to restriction and calories, and nutrition feels more like that. What's the valuable information that I get from my food rather than just the number? So that's kind of how I move it. Well, what we didn't really talk about is like intermittent fasting in the sense too. I wanted to, we
could do a whole episode on that.
We probably could.
Because there's a lot going on with autophagy and all that. I only said the word intermittent fasting during time restricted eating because I kind of see it as related to the time restricted.
Maybe we can do a discussion about that and how different ways to implement it, because it can be quite remarkable. But men and women, again, not always the same. Depending on your stress levels, we're gonna have to modify things. So like, I think maybe we do an episode on that in the future.
All right. Yeah. And if you're a naturopath out there with some real good game when it comes to intermittent fasting, or you focus a lot on it, give us an email or a shout on Instagram. Okay.
Great.
Cool. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks again, Michelle. It was fun. Again.
My pleasure. Again, as always. See you next week.
That Naturopathic Podcast. TNP.
Hello there.